I guess I'm tempted to say the things that may have meant most to me personally, those things that happened when I was in charge, when the whole burden was on me. But I can't really say that totally. The Selma to Montgomery March, which gave us the Voting Rights Act, nothing in the history of the movement has been more significant than the Voting Rights Act. At the close of that march, after Martin made his speech, how long? Not long. He named a committee to meet with George Wallace to take the demands of the march to George Wallace. He named me chair of that committee. And we got ready. So we checked with the general who was in charge of the National Guard and said, they had the Capitol surrounded, the troopers. And I said, we want to go to the Capitol, to the door to take the governor the demands. He said, okay. So he got on the phone, called the governor's office. He said, okay, go ahead. So I took my little committee, about 12, 15 of us. We walked up the steps, and the troopers didn't move. The Blue Sea, they had the blue uniforms. And Moses faced the Red Sea. Joseph faced the Blue Sea. And I looked back at the general as if to say, I thought you told me they were going to let us through. And he barked out some commands to the National Guard, which had been federalized, Hep, 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 hep. And the soldiers came over and stood in front of the troop and hep, hep, and threw their guns up, bayonets up on their shoulders, and the Blue Sea parted. And we walked through on dry steps and carried the, I know it's not as universal as Moses in the Red Sea, but to me, we were awfully glad to get through that Blue Sea. And went up to the door, and Wallace sent his secretary to take the demands. I refused to give him to him. We're not marching 50 miles to give these to a secretary and risk the Blue Sea out there. No, we give them to the governor. So he shut the door in our face, and we went away. We didn't get to meet with Wallace until almost a week later, when the Methodist bishop, a white bishop named Kenneth Goodson, Wallace was a Methodist, and he persuaded Wallace to meet with us. I don't think anything in the movement, even during my 21 years of presidency, and I was president at the time Martin and Ralph put together, but nothing meant more to me than that, because that event was so significant in the life of this country and the life of black people. We did finally meet with Wallace for 90 minutes, and all the while we were meeting, he was tearing up little pieces of paper on the desk. By the time we got to meet, he had a mountain, a little piece of paper. He had a discharge from the army. It was some kind of emotional thing. But I said to him that, Governor, I speak to you today as a Methodist preacher, to a Methodist layman, not as a civil rights leader, to a governor. And I'm going to tell you the Lord's going to hold you responsible for the kind of leadership you're giving, the hatred, the hostility, the violence that you inspire and you instigate. I said, you speak from the governor's office, but the people on the street don't have your platform. So they take a gun and shoot Valerie Uso on Highway 80, or they kill Jonathan Daniels in Selma. And he listened and bowed his head. But I guess I'd have to say that nothing was more meaningful than the whole thing of the Voting Rights Act, the subsequent meeting with Wallace. We met again later when we had the march, the 20th anniversary of the march in '85. His wife was, he was governor again. Then in '95, he was no longer governor. He was in a wheelchair. I led the reenaction. When we got almost to Montgomery, he sent word that he wanted to meet with us at St. Jude. St. Jude was a church and school where we met when we came into Montgomery. He wanted to meet us there. And so I called staff together and we talked, and some didn't want to let him come. And I decided I would not stand in the doorway of his repentance. as he stood in the doorway to stop the kids from getting an education. And so he came, and we sang "We Shall Overcome" on steps of St. Jude. And he apologized for what he had done in '65.
And did you believe that it was a sincere apology?
Yes, and the reason I do, because he had nothing to gain by lying. He had no political future. He was confined to a wheelchair. He could hardly talk above a whisper. So political motivation would have been totally irrelevant for him. So I think he had repented. You know, before Wallace became a segregationist, he was one of Kissing Jim Folsom's boys, a governor of Alabama, big 6'8", 9, 10 governor, who was supposed to be, quote, quote, a moderate. Wallace was one of his boys. And so Wallace was never always the arch segregationist. It was after he lost his first race to Patterson that he cried, "I'll never be out segregated or niggered again." And he became what he was. So his repentance, I think, was real. I spoke at the convention at Alabama State University a few years after that. Wallace was not only not in a wheelchair, he was in a bed then. And he sent for me, asked me if I'd come out to the house and pray with him after the commencement exercise. And I did. And we prayed. And he had to write. He couldn't talk then. He had to write. And he had a monitor up there and so forth. And he said, "Would you do me a favor before you leave?" I said, "Yeah, what is it?" He said, "I know that you know Ted Turner." And he said, "Ted Turner is doing a film on my life. In the film, he does two things that are wrong. One is he makes me a womanizer. That's not true. But I don't care about that. The thing I care about is, see that man standing right there in the room, an African-American man. See, he's been with me so many years. See, in the movie, they depict this man as a potential killer. They have him plotting to kill me. And that's a lie. Ask him if you don't believe it. Please go to Mr. Turner and tell him not to put that lie in the movie." Well, I didn't ask the fella. He was standing there. I didn't want to put him on the spot. I don't know what his answer would be. And I told him, I said, "Well, I'll try, but I can't promise anything." But that's what he wanted. That was the last time I saw him. He died shortly after that. I did go to Ted Turner. I called him, and Ted said, well, and then Ted fell out. He laughed so hard he dropped the phone. And he came back and he said, "Go tell the governor." He said, "I may call him myself. But tell him the movie is finished, number one. And number two, I had nothing to do with it, no." He said, "I'm just a figurehead sitting up here. The folks that did that movie is done. I have nothing to do with it." I said, "No, you call him." But I did call and tell his representative what Turner said. But I think it has to be the most voting rights, the drama of the Voting Rights Act. Of course, there are many other things. The situation in Decatur, where we were almost killed, is another thing that impacted my life. I think when we went to South Africa to meet with Mandela after his release was another moving moment for me.
Tell me about that.
Well, I was going to Namibia. That was the last African country that had its independence celebration, about the same time that Nelson was getting out of prison. And so I went to Johannesburg from Namibia and met with Mandela and with his partner, Winnie was then with him, and we had about an hour's meeting and talk. He was a marvelous man. And 3 years ago, they invited me back when he retired to speak at his testimonial dinner in Durban. That's when I got the hide of the bull from the tribe, and I'm an honorary chief. But that was a moving experience. And then when Mandela was over here, I carried him to my church and carried him down to SCLC. So meeting him and knowing him has been a great thrill. There are so many events in those 21 years that I led SCLC that were important, but I don't rate any of them over the Voting Rights Act. And when we marched in '79 to Washington, we got it extended. It expired in '82. 82. We marched up there in 82 and got it extended for 25 years. It will expire again in 2007. So but those sections that have to do with clearance of any change in voting rights, so that would be another climactic moment for the movement in 2007.